It began with the waves, winds that carried the scent of salt and ambition. In the 16th century, sleek wooden ships with billowing white sails cut through the Arabian Sea. On their decks stood men who came from faraway Europeans, driven by greed, hunger, and a whisper of destiny. They didn't come for land at first, only for what the land could give them: silk, spices, and gold. But like every empire before them, once they touched Indian soil, trade turned into conquest. The race for riches would become a race for dominion. The Portuguese came first, then the Dutch, the French, and finally the British, the ones who wouldn't leave for centuries. By the 1800s, Britain had transformed trade routes into borders and India into a jewel set deep in its imperial crown. Yet long before any European dreamed of crossing the ocean, India had already lived 1,000 lives. It had been home to kings and scholars, mathematicians and poets, empires that rose from the dust and fell back into it, leaving behind cities that whispered through the stones. It was here that humanity mapped the skies, calculated the stars, and built monuments so perfect that time itself would struggle to erode them. India's story, unlike that of most nations, didn't begin with the modern age. It began in the silence of an ancient river. For those who study the beginnings of civilization, the story starts with the Adivasi, the first people of India. These were nomadic tribes, wanderers who had lived across the subcontinent for tens of thousands of years. They hunted, foraged, and followed the rhythm of the seasons. They left little behind, just fragments of pottery, the faint trace of a hearth, and the oral memories of their descendants who still walk the forests today. Then, out of the dust and heat, came the first great cities. Along the banks of the Indus River, an empire was born that would rival Egypt, Mesopotamia, and China, yet remain a mystery to this day. The Indus Valley Civilization. Its people built cities before most of the world even had towns. Their homes were of baked brick. Their streets ran straight and true. Their drains carried waste away, while much of the world still lived in mud and straw. They had no kings carved in stone, no tales of conquest, only order, precision, and silence. At its height, the Indus world stretched across what is now Pakistan and northwestern India, home to millions spread across Harappa, Mohenjo-daro, and hundreds of other sites. Archaeologists still marvel at the complexity. Public baths, sewage systems, grain stores. This was a civilization centuries ahead of its time. They traded with Mesopotamia, carved seals for merchants, and controlled entry into their cities with walls and gates. Yet, for all this brilliance, their voices remain lost. Their script, etched into tablets and stones, has never been deciphered. We can read the past of Egypt through hieroglyphs, but the Indus people we can only imagine. No kings, no wars, no myths we can read. Just the echo of a civilization that vanished quietly. What ended them? Not a single event, but time itself. Around 1900 BC, the rivers began to shift. The monsoon rains weakened. The fertile plains turned to dust. Crops failed. The Indus River changed its course, stranding cities far from the water that had sustained them. Their people didn't disappear. They moved. Many scholars believe they became the ancestors of the Dravidian peoples whose descendants today speak Tamil, Telugu, and Kannada in the south. But as one civilization faded, another appeared, riding in from the northwest, the Vedic people, nomads from Central Asia who called themselves Arya. They brought horses, animals unknown to India until then, and chariots that thundered across the plains. Their language, Vedic Sanskrit, would become the root of so much of India's culture and literature. And their hymns, the Vedas, became the foundation of philosophy, ritual, and faith that would endure for thousands of years. The Rigveda, Yajurveda, Samaveda, and Atharvaveda, texts written in praise of gods, creation, and the meaning of existence. The Vedic world was one of tribes and cattle, of warriors and poets. They sang of dawn and rain, of battles and gods who walked among men. Over centuries, they settled along the Ganges, clearing forests with iron tools, planting fields, and founding villages. And as the people changed, so did society. From loose tribes came order and hierarchy. The Varna system emerged, dividing people like the body of a single being. The Brahmins, the priests, thinkers, and teachers who guided spiritual life. The Kshatriyas, the arms warriors and rulers who defended and governed. The Vaishyas, the Thais farmers, merchants, and landowners who sustained the economy. And the Shudras, the feet laborers and craftsmen, the foundation upon which everything else stood. It wasn't just a social structure, it was a cosmic design, one that would shape India for millennia. While the Vedic world flourished in the north, far to the south, other cultures thrived quietly. In the Deccan Plateau, the Yogve culture left behind signs of a civilization that lasted for centuries, one that fascinated archaeologists with its strange burial practices. Bodies with their feet cut off, headless idols guarding doorways. The reasons remain unknown, but the message is clear that there were many Indias, each with its own rhythm, its own mystery. By 600 BC, the age of the Vedas began to fade, replaced by something new: cities, kingdoms, and questions about life itself. The first great cities since the Indus Valley rose again in Magadha, Kuru, Kosala, and Vajji. Trade blossomed. Philosophies were debated in streets and forests alike, and amid all this, two men would change the spiritual landscape of the world forever. The first was Mahavira, born a prince who abandoned his riches in search of truth. After years of asceticism, he achieved Kevala Jnana, perfect knowledge, and taught the principles of Jainism: truth, non-possession, celibacy, and above all, ahimsa, non-violence. His followers, the Jains, believe in total compassion for every living being, and it is from them that India inherited its deepest moral code. The second was Siddhartha Gautama, the man who became the Buddha. A prince shielded from suffering, he stepped outside his palace one day and saw old age, sickness, and death. That moment shattered his illusion of comfort. He left his home, seeking the cause of suffering, and after years of meditation beneath a fig tree in Bodh Gaya, he found enlightenment. His revelation was simple, yet profound. All life is suffering. Suffering is caused by desire. To end suffering, one must end desire. And the path to do so is the eightfold path: right action, right speech, right intention, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, right concentration, and right understanding. It wasn't just a religion. It was a philosophy, a way of living. From the plains of India, Buddhism spread across Asia, reshaping empires from Sri Lanka to Japan. Meanwhile, the land that gave birth to these ideas continued to shift. Kingdoms fought for dominance 16. Great Mahajanapadas rising and falling, until one, Magadha, stood supreme. Its kings, like Bimbisara and his son Ajatashatru, ruled vast territories, meeting with thinkers and monks, even with the Buddha himself. Yet power always breeds betrayal. Ajatashatru murdered his father to seize the throne, later repenting after realizing the depth of his sin. Magadha's dominance marked the dawn of India's first empires. And when foreign powers arrived like Alexander the Great, crossing into India in 326 BC, they found a civilization older, richer, and far more complex than any they had conquered. Alexander's invasion was brief but legendary. He met King Porus on the banks of the Hydaspes River. The battle was fierce. Elephants clashed against Greek phalanxes. Chariots thundered through mud and rain. And when Porus was finally captured, Alexander, impressed by his courage, returned his kingdom to him. Yet, Alexander's army, weary and frightened by tales of an even greater empire ahead, refused to march further. That empire was the Nanda dynasty, soon to fall to a man who would change Indian history forever, Chandragupta Maurya. No one knows exactly where Chandragupta came from. Some say a royal bloodline, others a humble family. But with the guidance of his brilliant advisor Chanakya, he overthrew the Nandas around 320 BC and founded the Mauryan Empire, the first to unify most of India. He built cities of stone, armies of iron, and a bureaucracy that rivaled Rome's. Even the Greeks, through their ambassador Megasthenes, marveled at the capital Pataliputra, its towering walls, its countless gates, and its organized system of governance. Chandragupta's grandson would take this empire to its peak and then transform it from within. His name was Ashoka. At first, Ashoka was a conqueror. His war against Kalinga left over 200,000 dead. The rivers ran red with blood, but the victory haunted him. He walked among the bodies and saw not glory, only ruin. It changed him. From that day, Ashoka renounced violence, embraced Buddhism, and ruled through peace. He built hospitals, roads, and wells. He planted trees for travelers and sent envoys to spread the Buddha's message across the world. His edicts carved in stone still stand today, the voice of a man who learned that true power lies not in the sword, but in compassion. But like all empires, the Mauryans faded. Corruption, weak successors, and rebellion fractured their dominion. By 185 BC, the last Mauryan emperor was assassinated, and new dynasties, the Shungas, Kanvas, and later the Satavahanas, rose in their place. For centuries, India entered what some historians called a dark age, though it was anything but dark. Trade with Rome flourished. Gold coins bearing the faces of emperors like Marcus Aurelius have been found in Indian soil. Indian spices scented Roman kitchens. Indian silk adorned their elites. Across the oceans, Indian merchants reached Southeast Asia, spreading their language and religion. In the south, the Tamil kingdoms of the Cholas, Cheras, and Pandyas thrived, producing poetry, art, and architecture that still influence India's culture today. And then, from the north, came the Gupta Empire, the so-called Golden Age of India. Under rulers like Chandragupta first and Samudragupta, India reached a new zenith. Science, mathematics, art, and literature flourished. The concept of zero was refined, decimals introduced, and astronomers like Aryabhata charted the motion of planets and the rotation of the earth. Temples rose to honor Vishnu and Shiva, written in Sanskrit and carved in stone. The Ramayana and Mahabharata, epic stories of love, war, and destiny, were compiled into the forms we know today. Every Indian knew Arjuna's struggle, Krishna's words, Rama's exile stories that blended myth with moral truth. Yet even golden ages fade. The Guptas fell to waves of invaders, first the Huns, then countless regional kings. But India's flame never truly went out. For the next centuries, kingdoms rose and vanished like tides. The Chalukyas, Rashtrakutas, and Pallas built and battled. The Cholas, returning to power in the south, created a navy so vast that they conquered lands as far as Sumatra and Thailand. The Ajanta and Ellora caves, carved into stone cliffs, told stories of gods, devotion, and artistry unmatched even today. And then, from the deserts of Arabia, came a new faith, Islam. At first through trade, then through conquest. The first Muslim presence began in Sindh in the 8th century. Over time, new sultanates rose: Delhi, Bengal, Deccan. The Delhi Sultanate, founded in 1206, brought Persian art, architecture, and administration. Mosques and minarets rose beside temples, blending styles into something uniquely Indian. Yet peace was fragile. Dynasties like the Khiljis, Tughlaqs, and Lodis often ruled with iron fists, torn between tolerance and tyranny. Still, through this mingling, came something new, a fusion of culture, music, and language that would shape the future. By 1526, history would change again. From the mountains of Central Asia, a descendant of Genghis Khan and Tamerlane crossed into India, Babur. At the Battle of Panipat, he defeated the Lodi Sultan and founded the Mughal Empire, one of the most sophisticated civilizations in the world. Babur's dynasty would give India not just power, but beauty, a blend of Persian elegance and Indian heart. His grandson Akbar would expand the empire and change it forever. Akbar ruled not through fear, but through inclusion. He invited Hindus, Muslims, Jains, and Christians to debate at his court. He abolished the tax on non-Muslims, promoted art, music, and learning, and married women of different faiths to unite his people. Under him, India became a mosaic, diverse, dynamic, alive. But not every ruler would follow his wisdom. Centuries later, under Aurangzeb, the Mughal Empire hardened. Tolerance gave way to religious zeal. Taxes returned, temples were destroyed, and rebellions erupted. The empire that had once united India began to fracture. And waiting in the wings were new conquerors, ones who came not with swords, but with ships. The British. They arrived quietly, at first merchants of the East India Company, seeking spices and silk. But like those before them, trade turned to power. Through cunning, manipulation, and firepower, they turned allies into subjects and rivals into ghosts. The Battle of Plassey in 1757 sealed their fate and India's. With the fall of Bengal, the British East India Company became the de facto ruler of India. By the 1800s, they had taken control of nearly the entire subcontinent. What followed was both progress and pain railways, telegraphs, and modern schools built beside famine, exploitation, and rebellion. The Sepoy Rebellion of 1857, born from anger and humiliation, tried to drive them out. It failed, but it ended company rule forever. The British Crown took direct control, beginning the Raj. For the next century, India would be reshaped. Cities modernized, industries rose, yet millions starved under economic policies designed to serve London, not Delhi. Still, resistance brewed. Voices of reform, nationalism, and unity began to rise. Tilak, Nehru, Bose, Ambedkar, and one man who would become a symbol for peace itself, Gandhi. And as the 20th century dawned, the winds began to shift again. The British had ruled India for over a century, but their hold was built on cracks. The more they tightened their grip, the more those cracks began to spread. Beneath the surface of their so-called civilization project, resentment brewed like a storm waiting to break. It began quietly, with educated Indians realizing that the power the British claimed to hold through progress came at the cost of their own. The wealth of an empire was being drained from Indian soil, shipped in crates of silk and tea to London's harbours. Farmers starved while railway lines carried their grain to British ports. The streets of Calcutta shimmered with imported carriages, yet entire villages lived on borrowed rice. To the British, India was not a nation, it was a possession. But to the Indians, it was still something sacred, something alive. In 1885, a group of intellectuals gathered in Bombay to form a new movement, the Indian National Congress. It began as a polite forum for discussion, not revolution. Yet the idea behind it was more dangerous than any weapon. For the first time, Indians from across the continent, Hindus, Muslims, Sikhs, Parsis, met as equals to demand a say in how their land was governed. The British dismissed them as dreamers, but dreams, as history has shown, are powerful things. Decades passed. Small reforms came and went. But freedom, real freedom, was still a distant vision until the partition of Bengal in 1905. The British, claiming to improve administration, divided the province along religious lines, Hindus to the west, Muslims to the east. It was a decision that would sow the seeds of division for generations to come. But it also lit a fire. Across India, protests erupted. The cry of Swadeshi, buy Indian, echoed through the streets. People burned foreign cloth, refused British goods, and began to believe in something larger than protest in the possibility of self-rule. The British, startled by the scale of resistance, reversed their decision in 1911. But the damage was done. The illusion of loyalty had been broken. Then came the First World War. India, still under British rule, was dragged into a conflict that was not its own. Over 1 million Indian soldiers fought in foreign lands, from the deserts of the Middle East to the mud of France. They fought for a crown that saw them as subjects, not equals. When the war ended, those who returned expected gratitude, a promise of reform, perhaps even self-governance. Instead, they received betrayal. In 1919, the British passed the Rowlatt Act, giving authorities the power to arrest and imprison anyone suspected of anti-British activity without trial. Protests erupted across the country. One of them would end in horror in a walled garden in the city of Amritsar. Thousands had gathered peacefully to celebrate a religious festival and to voice their opposition to the Rowlatt Act. Without warning, British Brigadier General Reginald Dyer marched in with his troops, sealed the exits, and opened fire. For 10 long minutes, bullets rained down on the unarmed crowd. Men, women, children, no one was spared. When it was over, hundreds lay dead, their blood pooling in the dusty earth of Jallianwala Bagh. It was a moment that changed everything. Even Indians who had once been loyal to the British turned away in disgust. Among them was a man who had already begun to gather attention, Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi. He had studied law in London, lived in South Africa, and returned home carrying a new idea, one that would redefine resistance. His philosophy was simple but revolutionary: non-violence. Satyagraha, the force of truth. It was the belief that oppression could be defeated not through war, but through moral strength. Gandhi urged Indians to withdraw their cooperation with British rule, to boycott their goods, their courts, their schools. He traveled barefoot across villages, speaking softly, dressed not in silk or suits, but in hand-woven cloth. His simplicity became his power. People began to see themselves not as subjects, but as citizens. When the British imposed a tax on salt, a necessity of life, Gandhi responded, not with speeches, but with action. He set out on a 240-mile march to the sea, followed by thousands. When he reached the shore and scooped up a handful of salt, it was a gesture that shook an empire. He was arrested, of course, but it didn't matter. The world had seen. The world had listened. The Salt March became a symbol proof that even an empire could tremble before the will of the people. But the struggle was far from over. The Second World War erupted, and once again India was drawn in without consent. Millions of Indian soldiers fought under the British flag, yet back home the demand for independence had reached a fever pitch. Gandhi's call of "Quit India" in 1942 sent shockwaves through the country. The British imprisoned thousands, including Gandhi himself, but the tide had turned. When the war finally ended in 1945, Britain was exhausted financially, politically, and morally. The empire that once ruled the seas could no longer rule itself. The calls for Indian independence could no longer be ignored. In 1947, after centuries of invasion, conquest, and colonization, the unthinkable happened. The British agreed to leave. But freedom came with a price partition. The land that had stood as one for millennia was split into two nations, India and Pakistan. It was a line drawn not through maps but through hearts. Overnight, neighbors became enemies. Families fled across borders that hadn't even been finalized. The streets ran red again this time, not with the blood of rebellion, but of revenge. Trains arrived at stations filled not with passengers, but with corpses. Villages burned. Over 15 million people were displaced, and more than 1 million were killed. And through it all, Gandhi, the man who had led millions to freedom, fasted and prayed, pleading for peace. But hate was louder than prayer. On January 30th, 1948, as he walked to his evening prayer meeting, he was shot by a Hindu extremist who believed Gandhi had betrayed his people by being too kind to Muslims. As his body fell, India lost not just a man, but a conscience. The following day, India mourned in silence. Jawaharlal Nehru, Gandhi's friend and follower, addressed the nation. The light has gone out of our lives, and there is darkness everywhere. Yet from that darkness, a new dawn emerged. India became a republic in 1950. Its constitution, one of the most progressive in the world, promised equality to all regardless of caste, creed, or religion. For the first time in centuries, the destiny of India lay in Indian hands. Nehru became the first Prime Minister. Under him, India embarked on a journey of rebuilding from the ashes of empire to the hope of independence. He dreamed of an India driven by science, education, and industry. He established universities, built steel plants, and envisioned the nation as a bridge between East and West, neither capitalist nor communist, but uniquely Indian. But independence didn't mean peace. The partition left open wounds, and one of them bled in Kashmir. The princely state, ruled by a Hindu Maharaja but populated mostly by Muslims, became the spark of the First Indo-Pakistani War in 1947. Both India and Pakistan claimed it. By the time the United Nations brokered a ceasefire, the land had been split, a division that still haunts both nations. And so began a rivalry that would define South Asia for generations. As India struggled to rebuild, it also faced the ghosts of its past. Poverty, illiteracy, and inequality loomed large. The caste system, though legally abolished, lingered in shadows. Famine still stalked the land. But India endured. Nehru's leadership gave way to his daughter, Indira Gandhi, who rose to power in 1966, a woman who would become both admired and feared. Under her rule, India became a nuclear power, standing among the world's strongest nations. But her grip on power grew tight, too tight. In 1975, facing charges of corruption, she declared a state of emergency, suspending civil rights and jailing her opponents. For nearly 2 years, India lived under her command. Yet history, as ever, moved in cycles. When elections returned, she was voted out, only to return to power again before her own bodyguards assassinated her in 1984, sparking a wave of violence that scarred the nation. Her son, Rajiv Gandhi, would carry the family's legacy forward until he too was assassinated in 1991. The Nehru-Gandhi dynasty that had guided India for decades seemed cursed to die as martyrs. But the nation they helped build survived. Through the 1990s, India began to change, opening its economy, embracing technology, and stepping into a new world. Computers replaced typewriters, satellites circled the sky, and cities like Bangalore and Mumbai became centers of innovation. By the dawn of the 21st century, India was no longer the colony that Britain had once exploited. It was a rising power, vast, diverse, and impossible to ignore. Still, its challenges were immense. Over 1 billion people needed food, jobs, and homes. Religious tensions persisted, and politics often blurred the line between democracy and power. Yet, through all of it, India's story remained the same, a story of survival. From the Indus to the Mughals, from the British to the present, India has endured what few nations ever could. Empires came to claim it, faiths came to divide it, and yet it remained. Today, when one walks through the streets of Delhi, or Varanasi, or Chennai, the past breathes beside the present. Ancient temples stand beside glass towers. A rickshaw passes a luxury car, and somewhere in the hum of 1 billion lives, the rhythm of the old world beats on. India has always been a paradox, ancient yet new, wounded yet unbroken, chaotic yet deeply peaceful. It is said that in India, time doesn't move in a straight line. It circles, it repeats, it renews. Empires rise, crumble, and rise again. But the land endures. And perhaps that is the mystery of India, that through thousands of years of conquest, invention, suffering, and rebirth, it has never stopped being itself. The faces change, the rulers change, even the gods change, but the spirit remains vast, eternal, and unknowable. Because India isn't just a country. It's an idea, a rhythm, a story that began with the river and still flows unstoppable toward tomorrow. By the time the 1990s arrived, India was standing at a crossroads, torn between the past it couldn't forget and the future it could almost see. The cold winds of globalization were sweeping across the world, and India, with its ancient soul and young population, was about to change faster than ever before. For decades, its economy had been slow and cautious, wrapped in red tape and state control, a legacy of the socialist path Nehru once believed would keep the country safe from foreign domination. But safety had turned to stagnation. Industries struggled, imports were limited, and the nation's debt grew heavier each year. Then, in 1991, the crisis came. Foreign reserves had nearly vanished. The government was on the brink of default. Ships loaded with gold were sent abroad as collateral. India's back was against the wall. That was when new leaders, practical, unflinching, decided it was time to open the doors. The economy was liberalized, restrictions were lifted, foreign companies entered, private entrepreneurs emerged. What followed was a quiet revolution, not fought in streets, but in markets, boardrooms, and classrooms. It wasn't just numbers that changed. It was the mindset. India, for the first time in centuries, began to see itself not as a victim of history, but as a maker of it. The 1990s gave birth to a new kind of dreamer. They weren't kings or warriors. They were engineers, programmers, and designers. The world was becoming digital, and India was ready. Cities like Bangalore, Hyderabad, and Pune became symbols of modern ambition. Glass towers rose beside ancient temples. The children of farmers were writing code for global corporations. It was a paradox that could only exist in India, where one man might read the Vedas by oil lamp while his neighbor built satellites for NASA. By the early 2000s, India was no longer the story of famine and foreign rule that the world once told. It was a story of youth and invention. The world's eyes shifted eastward to a nation that had survived every empire, every invasion, and was now building one of its own through intellect and innovation. But progress never comes without a price. As the cities glowed brighter, the villages dimmed. Millions were left behind by the rush of modernization. The divide between the rich and the poor widened. Farmlands gave way to factories. Ancient rivers, once sacred, grew poisoned with waste. And while the stock market soared, entire communities struggled to find clean water. India's strength, its diversity, was also its deepest challenge. A country of over 1 billion people, speaking hundreds of languages, practicing dozens of faiths, and yet trying to move forward as one. It was never simple. Old wounds between Hindus and Muslims still pulsed beneath the surface. In 1992, when a mosque in Ayodhya was torn down by extremists claiming it stood on a sacred Hindu site, the country erupted. Cities burned. Families hid behind locked doors. The promise of unity faltered under the weight of suspicion. But even in chaos, India endured. It always did. Then came a new millennium, and with it, the sense that India's time had come. The internet connected its people to the world. Outsourcing and technology made Indian talent indispensable to the global economy. Millions were lifted out of poverty. New billionaires appeared. The world began to speak of India as a rising superpower. And yet beneath the hum of progress, a quiet unease lingered. The country's heart, rural, traditional, spiritual, was beating in a rhythm different from its cities. The promises of globalization didn't always reach the fields where farmers prayed for rain. The education that fueled the tech boom was still out of reach for many. And while new wealth glittered in skyscrapers, old hierarchies, caste, gender, and class still held firm in the streets below. India was modern, but not entirely free. When Narendra Modi rose to power in 2014, he promised to bridge that divide, to turn India's growing energy into something unstoppable. He came not from an old dynasty, but from humble beginnings, a tea seller who had climbed step by step to the highest office in the land. His message was simple: pride, progress, and power. For some, he was the voice of a new, confident India, bold, nationalistic, and determined to reclaim its place among the great nations. For others, he was a reminder of how easily pride can become polarization. Under his rule, India grew richer and louder. Skyscrapers stretched higher, highways cut through mountains, and digital India became a reality. Spacecraft reached Mars. Nuclear tests confirmed India's strength. The economy surged ahead, becoming the world's fifth largest. But critics whispered of another truth, of a country divided again not by colonizers this time, but by ideology. Freedom of speech felt thinner. Journalists vanished. Religious minorities felt uncertain. The same faith that had given India resilience for millennia was now, at times, used to draw lines instead of erasing them. Still, to millions, Modi remained a symbol, a reminder that India, for all its chaos, could stand tall, that its people, once ruled by empires, could now command their own destiny. Across the nation you could feel the shift. The smell of incense still filled temple courtyards, but now mixed with a buzz of drones flying overhead. A farmer might use a smartphone to check monsoon forecasts, while a monk recited prayers in the same field. Tradition and technology were no longer opposites, they were merging, as India always had done, into something new. In 2020, as the world was shaken by the pandemic, India faced its greatest test in decades. Streets emptied, trains halted. Millions of migrant workers walked hundreds of miles back to their villages under the blistering sun. For a moment, it felt as if the old India, the one that had known famine and struggle, had returned. But slowly the lights flickered back on. Vaccines were made, factories reopened, and again, as always, India endured. By 2024, something symbolic happened. India overtook China to become the world's most populous nation. Never before had so many people with so many differences shared a single identity. The question wasn't whether India could lead the world, it was whether the world was ready for an India that no longer followed. For thousands of years, this land had been the prize everyone wanted: Persians, Greeks, Mughals, British. Each came with swords or ships, claiming to bring order, faith, civilization. Each left behind pieces of themselves, but none took India's soul. Now, for the first time in history, India stood unchallenged. Not conquered, but awake. And yet, even in triumph, the same question that haunted the Indus, the Mauryas, the Guptas, and the Mughals still lingered. Can unity survive diversity? From the crowded alleys of Mumbai to the quiet temples of Tamil Nadu, from the frozen heights of Kashmir to the humid fields of Bengal, India hums with contradictions. It is both ancient and futuristic, spiritual and pragmatic, impoverished and powerful. Its strength lies not in uniformity, but in its ability to absorb everything, every idea, every invasion, every revolution, and still remain itself. But every empire that rose here once believed it was unshakable. The Mauryas thought their reach eternal. The Guptas believed their wisdom would guide the world. The Mughals built marble to defy time. All fell. Now, the modern republic stands in their place, proud, vast, defiant. The temples rise again, the satellites orbit above, and the markets overflow with color and sound. but the old lessons still whisper in the wind. Power in India has always been borrowed, never owned. A single drought can humble a government. A spark of anger can ignite a million voices. The land remembers everything and forgets nothing. Perhaps that's what makes India different. Where others see chaos, India sees balance. Where others see contradiction, India sees truth. It is a country that contains everything: the saint and the skeptic, the beggar and the billionaire, the silence of meditation and the noise of protest. And through it all, the same pulse beats beneath, slow, steady, unbreakable. India is not perfect. It never was. But it has always been alive. When night falls over the subcontinent and the lights of 1 billion homes flicker against the dark, you can almost feel the centuries breathing. The same rivers that carried the boats of the Indus still flow. The same mountains that watched Ashoka's armies still stand. And in every street, in every song, in every prayer, the story continues. Because India was never meant to end. It was meant to evolve, to transform, to teach the world that civilization isn't about perfection. It's about endurance. From the farmers who still wake before dawn to touch the earth, to the students coding through the night under the glow of a laptop screen, India's story is the same: struggle, survival, and spirit. Empires will come again. Challenges will return. But India will remain. And when the future generations look back, they will see not just a timeline of rulers and wars, but something larger: the story of a people who refuse to vanish. The story of a land that has seen everything, lost everything, and still smiles. The story of India. Even today, when you look at India, you see a contradiction that shouldn't work, but somehow does. There are cities that never sleep, glowing with electric light, and villages where the night sky is still so dark you can count every star. There are billion-dollar startups in the same country where children still walk miles barefoot for school. There are temples that predate Rome standing next to skyscrapers taller than anything the Mughals could have dreamed of. And yet, somehow, it all feels connected. Maybe that's the secret that's kept India alive, its ability to contain opposites and call them harmony. For thousands of years, it has taken every influence: Persian, Greek, Mongol, British, and folded them into itself, never erased, never surrendered, always transformed. When you walk through the narrow streets of Delhi, the past feels close enough to touch. A tea stall plays Bollywood songs over an old radio. A few steps away stands a Mughal archway crumbling into the dust. And just beyond it, glass towers gleam against the smog, reflecting a future that's still finding its shape. India lives in layers. Under every modern moment, there's an ancient echo. The software engineer writing code in Bangalore walks the same spiritual path once traveled by the monks of Nalanda. The artist painting murals in Mumbai carries the same instinct that carved Ajanta's caves in stone. The scientist launching rockets in Sriharikota is guided by the same curiosity that once charted the planets above the Ganges. It's as if time itself spirals here, never moving straight, looping from ancient to modern and back again, in a rhythm only India understands. But beneath the beauty, there is still unease, a shadow that follows every light. As the country grows wealthier, the inequality grows sharper. Skyscrapers rise beside slums, the rich build higher walls, and the poor wait for promises that never come. Corruption moves quietly, hidden beneath speeches of progress. And sometimes in the noise of ambition, the quieter voices, the farmers, the laborers, the forgotten, are drowned out. Technology has changed everything, yet nothing. The phones are smarter, the streets busier, the dreams bigger, but the same questions remain: who benefits? Who decides what progress means? In the rush to become a superpower, the soul of India walks a fine line between memory and modernity. There are those who say India must embrace its ancient identity, return to its roots, its gods, its heritage. And there are others who say India must move forward, abandon the old, and build a new world guided by science and logic. But India has never been either or, it has always been both. It is the land of the monk and the merchant, the mystic and the mathematician, the land that invented zero and yet believes that everything has meaning. And now, in the 21st century, that balance is being tested more than ever. The internet has given every Indian a voice, billions of them, loud, passionate, and often divided. Social media has turned every conversation into a battlefield. Faith and politics blur until they are indistinguishable. The same tools that connected a billion people also expose just how fragmented that billion can be. Still, within that chaos, something remarkable is happening. Young Indians, the largest youth population on Earth, are redefining what it means to be part of this ancient civilization. They are no longer content with the idea that progress must look Western. They are writing their own story, mixing heritage with invention. They build apps in English but dream in Hindi. They study physics by day and pray to ancient gods by night. They wear sneakers with kurtas and call it fashion. The West once called India the sleeping giant, but this giant isn't waking up, it's evolving, reshaping itself in ways the world can't predict. And yet there's one truth the world often forgets. India doesn't chase power for dominance. It never did. Every empire that came here sought conquest. Alexander, the Mughals, the British. India's empires, even at their height, sought meaning. They built temples instead of fortresses. They wrote scriptures instead of manifestos. They studied the heavens, not just the earth. Its power has always been inward, philosophical, reflective. Even today, when you look at India's scientists launching rockets to the moon or Mars, you sense something almost spiritual in their ambition, not a race to conquer space, but to understand it. It's that same search for understanding that once made India the teacher of the world. From yoga to mathematics, philosophy to medicine, ideas that began in this land still ripple across the planet. But now, the teacher has become a student again, learning to navigate a new global order, where data is the new empire and technology the new crown. India's challenge is not whether it can lead, but whether it can stay true to itself while leading. Because power has a strange way of changing those who hold it. The Mauryas learned it, the Guptas learned it, the Mughals learned it, and the British learned it the hardest way of all. Every great Indian empire rose with purpose and fell with pride. If modern India forgets that lesson, history may remind it again. Still, there's something different this time. The India of today is not built on the will of one king or one dynasty. It's built on the voices of millions, messy, loud, contradictory, but free. And that freedom, fragile as it may be, is something no invader, no empire, no ideology has ever been able to fully crush. When you travel across the subcontinent, you feel that freedom in the smallest things. In the laughter of children running barefoot through rain-soaked fields. In the chants echoing from temples at dawn. In the roar of traffic where old meets new. In the silent prayer of a mother lighting a lamp before sending her child to school. Every act, every sound, every ritual, it all tells the same story. We are still here. It's strange for all its complexity. India's identity is simple. It is survival. It has endured floods, famines, invasions, and betrayal. And each time, it finds a way to continue. Even its pain becomes art. Its ruins become monuments. Its chaos becomes rhythm. When outsiders look at India, they often see disorder. But look closer, and that disorder reveals design, a living mosaic where every contradiction fits somewhere. Modern India may have its tensions, politics, inequality, religious strife, but beneath it all is a unity that cannot be engineered or destroyed. It's not written in laws or constitutions. It's written in instinct. That's why, even in its darkest hours, India never collapses. It bends, adapts, and survives. And maybe that's why the rest of the world looks at India not with pity anymore, but with curiosity, wondering how a land so old can still feel so young. When Prime Minister Modi spoke at the inauguration of the new Ram Temple in 2024, it wasn't just a religious ceremony. It was something symbolic, a statement about identity, heritage, and pride. For millions, it was the fulfillment of a centuries-old dream. For others, it was a reminder of wounds still healing. But either way, it revealed something timeless about India, that faith and power here have always danced together, creating beauty and danger in equal measure. The temple's golden spires reflected the sun like the crowns of forgotten kings. Chanting filled the air, and people wept not just for religion but for belonging. In that moment, whether one agreed with it or not, India remembered itself. It remembered that its greatest strength isn't its armies or its wealth. It's its ability to believe in gods, in ideas, in possibilities. That belief built this nation once before. It might be what carries it forward again. Still, one can't ignore the shadows. Modern India faces challenges older than any empire: poverty, inequality, the tension between faith and reason. Its cities choke with pollution, its politicians with corruption, its youth wrestle with questions their ancestors never had to ask: how to stay connected to something ancient while racing into a digital age that forgets yesterday by sunrise. But this is India. It was never meant to be simple. In the end, its complexity might be its greatest weapon, the chaos that makes it unstoppable. Every generation that tries to define India ends up failing because India refuses to be defined. It can't be summarized by a single religion, or a single language, or a single ideology. It's too vast, too contradictory, too alive. It's a nation that worships thousands of gods and still welcomes atheists. It's a country that prays for peace while arguing in every direction. It's a civilization where the divine and the mundane coexist, where a person can debate philosophy one moment and bargain for mangoes the next. India doesn't need to chase destiny. It is destiny. The river that birthed its first cities still flows, winding past new highways and old ruins. The same land that once heard the hymns of the Vedas now hums with the sound of machines. The same sky that once guided ancient astronomers now holds satellites and space stations. Time for India isn't something that passes, it's something that circles back. Every rise is followed by a fall, and every fall by renewal. It's been that way since the Indus. It will be that way long after we're gone. And maybe that's the real mystery, that India's story doesn't belong to history books or rulers or dates. It belongs to the land itself, to the dust that remembers every footprint, to the rivers that carry the stories of civilizations long buried, to the people who still, after 5,000 years, wake up believing tomorrow will be better. That belief, not gold, not power, not a technology, is India's true treasure. Because when everything else falls away, that belief remains. And if you listen closely beyond the noise of traffic, the chants, the arguments, and the prayers, you can still hear it. The hum of something ancient. The pulse of a civilization that refuses to die. A rhythm that started with a river and became the heartbeat of a billion souls. The story of India isn't over. It's just beginning again. As the 21st century deepens, India finds itself standing on a precipice not of collapse, but of transformation. The world has entered an age of uncertainty, and yet, in that uncertainty, India seems strangely at home. Perhaps because chaos has always been its natural state, and from chaos, it always finds its way. Everywhere you look, change is unfolding. The skyline of Mumbai now looks like a mirage of glass and steel. In Hyderabad, children born into poverty learn coding in schools powered by solar energy. Farmers in Punjab use drones to monitor crops. The same land that once fed ancient empires now feeds algorithms. There's something poetic about it, the country that taught the world to count, now teaching the world to compute. But the same forces that propel India forward also pull it apart. The population, now surpassing 1.4 billion, is both its greatest gift and its greatest burden. It is a force of energy, creativity, and ambition, but also one of demand, hunger, and need. Each day, 25 million Indians wake up searching for work, for food, for opportunity. The question is no longer whether India can feed its people, but whether it can give them all a future. In the neon glow of its cities, progress looks unstoppable. But in the stillness of its villages, the old India waits patient, watchful, sometimes forgotten. It waits in the sound of temple bells at dawn. It waits in the scent of wet earth after rain. It waits in the lullaby of a grandmother who still remembers the days when the British flag hung over her town. For her, independence wasn't a date. It was a feeling, a memory carried in silence. And for her grandchildren, that silence has been replaced with noise, the buzzing of phones, the hum of machines, the endless stream of information that never lets the mind rest. The India of tomorrow is hyperconnected, global, restless. But somewhere deep beneath all that movement lies something constant, the quiet conviction that this land cannot be conquered again. Not by armies, not by ideologies, not by time. When you step onto the streets of New Delhi today, you can see the layers of that conviction. Colonial buildings sit beside metro stations. Statues of freedom fighters stand beneath LED billboards. Cows wander past cafes filled with entrepreneurs discussing blockchain and startups. It shouldn't make sense. And yet somehow it does. Because India doesn't erase history. It collects it layer upon layer, century upon century, until even the chaos feels designed. Its democracy, noisy and imperfect, continues to be one of the most vibrant in the world. Every election is a storm, millions voting, arguing, celebrating, and yet, somehow, the storm always settles into order. Power changes hands, the institutions creak, but they don't collapse. For all its flaws, democracy here is not just politics. It's identity. It's the idea that no single voice, not even the loudest, can define what India is. Still, there's unease. In recent years, divisions have deepened. Lines drawn centuries ago by religion, caste, and class have not disappeared, they've adapted. Social media has given them new battlegrounds, new weapons. Misinformation spreads faster than truth. Opinion replaces fact. And the dream of unity sometimes feels like it's fading into noise. Yet in every era of confusion, India has always found a way to listen to itself. And it's doing that again through art, film, literature, and technology. Indian filmmakers tell stories not just for the world, but for themselves, stories about identity, migration, faith, and rebellion. Writers capture the contradictions of the modern Indian mind, proud and lost, hopeful and haunted. And somewhere in the mix, a new generation of Indians is redefining what it means to belong. They travel abroad, build empires in Silicon Valley, and still come home for Diwali. They speak English at work and regional dialects at home. They question tradition but defend it when outsiders mock it. They are neither East nor West, they are both. And that's what makes them unstoppable. It's said that when India breathes, the world feels it. You see it in the global economy, in the migration of talent, in the quiet influence of its culture from yoga studios in Los Angeles to Bollywood songs played at weddings in Paris. But India's story has never just been about influence. It's been about endurance, the ability to hold pain, beauty, and contradiction in the same breath. As the years pass, climate change looms as another test. The same monsoons that once brought life to the Indus Valley are becoming unpredictable. Droughts stretch longer. Floods come faster. Rivers that sustained civilizations for millennia are drying at their edges. And yet, amidst the uncertainty, innovation rises again. Farmers in Rajasthan use solar pumps. Architects in Kerala build flood-proof homes. Environmental groups in the Himalayas replant ancient forests. It's as if the land itself refuses to die, and those who live upon it follow its example. India's resilience is not born of arrogance, it's born of memory. A memory older than most nations of loss, survival, and rebirth. The world watches, often with confusion. To outsiders, India seems unpredictable. To those who live there, unpredictability is the point. It's not a straight line. It's a circle, one that always comes back to where it began. The rhythm of drums during festivals echoes the chants of ancient rituals. The flow of traffic mirrors the flow of the Ganges, chaotic, endless, alive. The tension between modernity and tradition isn't a conflict. It's a dance. A dance that has lasted 5,000 years. And like all dances, it needs rhythm. India's rhythm has always been faith, not just in gods, but in itself. When Modi stood beneath the blazing sun of Ayodhya and declared that the wait of centuries has ended, some heard politics, others heard prophecy. But beneath all the debate, one truth remained: India had come full circle again. A temple rebuilt, a faith restored, a nation reminded that its history is never really gone. It just sleeps until someone wakes it. Still, the question remains: what comes next? Can a nation so vast, so complex, truly remain united under one vision? Can it grow without losing the heart that once defined it, the compassion of Ashoka, the curiosity of Aryabhata, the tolerance of Akbar, the resilience of Gandhi? The answers are uncertain, but then India has always thrived in uncertainty. When the rest of the world sees crisis, India sees opportunity. When others predict collapse, it quietly adapts. And when others finally understand it, it changes again. That's why the story of India never ends. It just keeps rewriting itself in new languages, with new voices, on new screens. 1,000 years from now, someone will still be telling this story. Maybe not in the same words, maybe not in the same way, but the essence will remain. The rise and fall, the chaos and calm, the endless rhythm of a civilization that refuses to fade. Because India is not just a place, it's a mirror. It reflects everything we know about the world: power, faith, greed, compassion, and the constant struggle to find meaning between them. To understand India is to understand humanity itself, flawed, fragile, and beautiful. And maybe that's why, even after all these centuries, the world still looks to this land with wonder. Because somewhere within its noise and dust lies the quiet truth that every civilization seeks, the proof that life, no matter how broken, can begin again. India began again after every conquest, every famine, every betrayal. And it will begin again after this age too. Maybe one day its skyscrapers will crumble just like the walls of Harappa. Maybe the digital age will fade like the empires before it, but the spirit that built it, the will to endure, to rise from ashes, that will remain. So when you stand at the edge of a crowded street in Delhi, or look out over the Ganges at sunset, remember you're not just watching a country, you're watching time itself, alive, awake, eternal. And as the sun sets behind the haze, and the evening call to prayer blends with the temple bells, you can almost feel the truth echo through the air. The story of India was never meant to end. Because India is the story,